It's been a very excellent conference so far, and also all the previous talks were pretty amazing. So I hope you will be a bit inspired with what I'm about to show you. And the project that I will talk about is a project that started with actually wooden boxes that were found in the basements of the library, the Royal Library in Brussels. They contacted me a few years ago to look at it and to see what they were. And they were actually like just stored in the basements of like a very tall library building in Brussels. And they contained material with punches and matrices, printing material from type foundries that were forgotten, printing material with original type founding typefaces from type foundries that were based in Brussels and in Belgium in the 18th and 19th century. Now I have to make a few notes because the Low Countries has already like a long tradition in creating typefaces and printing types, especially in the 16th century with Christoffel Plantin in Antwerp and other punch cutters that were living there as well. But this specific project is to do with when Belgium was found. So that the country of Belgium was found in 1930. After there were some riots in Brussels, and they actually made the Dutch king, who was at that moment ruling Belgium, to move back to the Netherlands. Now, at that specific time, most of the printing types were still being used from Christoffel Plantin, also from François Rosard, a Belgian punch cutter who also lived and worked in the Netherlands. And William I, the king of the Netherlands, had a few years before the riot happened, invested heavily in creating a type foundry in Belgium, and that was called the Fonderie Normale. But of course, when he had to flee to the Netherlands, he was clever enough to take everything with him and move into Den Haag as well, and everything was stored there. So Belgium was founded in 1831. The new law was actually instigated, and of course, people wanted to have like their own kind of literature printed, their own kind of newspapers and magazine printed, and a lot of small type founders actually came to the center of Europe in Brussels to store there. A few of them, like the one Pennequin that you see here, are like creating types that were inspired by the French style that was at that moment, and we are talking now the mid-19th century, in fashion in Paris. Now you can already see here, because I will be talking about branding as well, in the whole story of this historical discovery, that you can see that this name card, because this was actually the business card at that time in 1821, that Charles Pennequin actually created to distribute to the people he would work with, mainly printing houses, that he was actually excellent in engraving very delicate typefaces. Not only in Brussels, but also in Antwerp. There were also a few smaller type foundries, mainly independent one-person companies. And here is a beautiful example of Hartung, who created his own lettergieterij, which is called type foundry in Dutch, in Antwerp. But you can already imagine from this type system that the branding that he chose to do was a bit more decorative and a bit more ornamented. Now what's even more is that on the title pages of Hartung's type specimen books, he already created kind of a logo that indicated what his profession was or what it was doing. So he was actually creating typefaces, making typefaces, and also that were being used for printing printing presses and printing houses. Another unique thing is that you can see, this is a type specimen from 1821, that you can see one of the very early examples of reverse typefaces in a modern style. And that's pretty unique because one of my other subjects that I'm doing research in is about the evolution of reverse italics and when they were being used. And this is one of the earliest examples that I could find. Now, this logo type, we actually call it a printer's mark, because it's not a new idea. Like creating branding, we might think that it might be something from the last 70 years after the 1950s and commercially available purchases, that people needed to make an identity, needed to stand out in the market to be commercially viable. But already in the advent, or like the first days of printing, printers were actually also being good businessmen. This is an example from a print mark, like the logotype, you could say, from a Bruges printer, Collard Mention. And why it's one of the first is that it's from a printed book from 1479. So it's a few years before Aldus Manutius in Venice was actually also printing very delicate and Renaissance-style printing books. And this is just to give an example that already also in the 15th century, in the Renaissance, people were very aware of creating an identity for themselves and also to show the world that if they wanted some products to be made, that they have to come to you. Because a famous example is Christophe Plantin, of Christophe Plantin from Antwerp, that had his logotype Labore et Constantia printed on all the title pages. But on the right, you can also see that this work was also produced in Officina Plantiniana, that he was already also marketing himself. He went abroad in Europe to Frankfurt, for instance, and other places in Europe to actually negotiate translations of printed books, to also sell some of the printing types and typefaces that were being created in his own printing house. So he was a very clever businessman, and that's how come that also, not only because he was a very excellent printer, but also was keen in and had a good eye, so I should say, in also explaining things, to grow his business, basically. The logo is still in use nowadays for the Museum Plant in Moretis, an updated version. And you can see that Hartung also even used his own self-portrait as one of the vignettes in one of the, title pages. This is mainly a poster to be used for selling his printing types. Now, in those wooden boxes were also documents, like a list of the matrices that were included. And it indicated that some of the type foundries or the factories at that time were mainly situated in Brussels. Here you can see one of the earlier versions of a very big type founder, Van der Borgt, who was situated near the center of Brussels, very close to the railway station that was being built, and that was the mean of transportation, because, of course, the heavily weights of the type and the machinery that they also produced needed to be transported all over Belgium. And you can already see that they put a lot of effort in making very delicate ornamented typefaces. Van der Borgt and also the two other type foundries that I will show you, which is Schildknechts and Valois Nouri, because the three of them existed around the same period of time. They actually operated in the advent of the new style that was emerging in Belgium, especially with the architecture, that was the Art Nouveau. So you can see that a lot of the typefaces that they created was very organic, was very, display typefaces were very smooth and curvature, influenced by fauna and flora. And of course, they had to also compete with each other. So that's why branding is quite important. They were very skilled in making original typefaces, especially for posters. And Tim already explained that also in London at the same period of time, although the period in Brussels is a few decennia later. They were very into identifying themselves within the mass or the cacophony of all the different posters and pamphlets. So they had to stand out with exquisite typefaces. One of the specimens also showed from Van den Borg that they were also specialized in creating typefaces for newspapers. And this is very important because at this very moment, there is no Belgian newspaper that uses Belgian typefaces, like the NRC Handelsblad in the Netherlands or Le Monde in France, or the New York Times or the Zeitung in Germany. They all have their own custom fonts being made for the local newspapers. At the moment, there's no newspaper in Belgium that uses them. But at that time, they also produce type for newspapers. And as you can see here, it's kind of typefaces that need to show up or be catching in the eye. This is an example that they also were thinking about different styles of printing. These are chromatic typefaces, so you need at least 2 or 3 print runs to print also the red color and the golden color on the page, which means that also the type being made existed of the 3 different layers, so they had to be positioned differently on the printing press. And because I examined all the different type specimens for the project from the different foundries that I could find all over Belgium, but also in St. Bright Library, which Tim talked about earlier in London. You can see that there is like a lot of types that were catching in the eye. Also, like for instance, one of the early reverse contrast styles, and very almost timeless typefaces, because this is an example from a type foundry, a typeface from Van Louis-Noury, and it could be that, I mean, if we would see it now, a few years ago, there was these typefaces, especially in Belgium, also, that were being used like to create concert posters or identities for concerts or festivals, and you name it. However, they branded not only like their typefaces, or those type specimens, but also the wooden types themselves. If you look very closely, okay, it's very difficult to see, but in the middle, they actually punched the wood type with the logo type that they created, so that if people were interested in buying wood type, they could also go and find where it originated from. Now, because I had to identify what it was, and there was not many sources because none of the companies exist anymore, I also did a lot of research in mapping all the possible type specimens, and here you can see an example in which not only I was interested in seeing which wood type or poster type they would actually promote, but also which typefaces they found themselves were the best to represent the company. This is an example like the original poster. Sorry, I have to go back. Whoops, no, this is, okay, this is the other one, no problem. This is the original poster, and it's actually these types that I'm also interested in to be seeing that whether this is a Belgian typeface or whether it was inspired by another one from any neighboring company. This very huge poster of printing types that's Carabin Schildknecht, like in this case Gustav Schildknecht, was displaying to the different printers in Belgium, actually also indicated why branding is important. Because if you again look very closer, and this is really a poster that is almost as long, half the way of like the display that's outside with all the schedule of the program of the conference. If you look very closely, copy is also a very important issue of branding. So here you can tell that not only the typefaces are shown, but also that what Schildknecht did is actually being the new owner of all the material that's Charles Pennequin, the one that you saw earlier with the very beautiful swashes, that they actually bought his type and continue to use it. I wanted to know which typefaces were quite popular, which were like famous or which were mainly used. So I had access to quite a number of invoices. And invoices, of course, is also a way of using your visual identity. And nowadays, we actually do exactly the same. And it also, like an invoice, explains like, okay, which typeface was sold to a printing press or a printing house. And so in that case, you could see which were the best sellers and which was also making no money at all. And I'm going to give you one example of Van der Borgt to indicate that in a few years' time, this is 1878, they use black letter as being the identity typeface. A few years later, 1887, they use a kind of a more slab serif-like typeface. A few decades later, and now we are 1873, earlier I have to say, they use actually this kind of 3D effect kind of typeface, explaining also, and I have to go back one moment again, that they won a lot of medals on international exhibitions, on fairs of the industry. So again, I mean, in their vision of branding, and creating a visual identity, they also wanted to show that they were experts in what they were doing and that they were having the expertise of creating beautiful typefaces. Here is another example of a very interesting printing type that they were using at this specific moment. I come back to this specific invoice a bit later. But you can see that according to the trends, and now we are already in 1909, they used like a kind of a Cheltenham-style typeface that was at that time very much in fashion. And even in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, or 1943, so they were actually changing their visual identity to a sans serif typeface. It's just to give an example, like in which way they actually moved with what was in fashion, and they used their own kind of catalog of library of printing types to use them themselves in their branding for the time being. Now, other sources are also important, and it's not only in Belgium, but I think for many other countries, is that when you investigate also special magazines, and in this case, this is a revue typographique, so it's like only a monthly magazine or journal, or Le Buff Illustré. It's also a journal that was printed especially for the industry, so for printers, for type founders, to tell about what are the styles in Italy, what is being used in France, how much does it cost to buy or to hire a typesetter, if there's a strike or if things happened, and what are the fashions. Because it was for the company, for the industry, they are completely filled with advertisements. And again, this is also for the individual type founders the best way to actually promote themselves, to show at that specific time what was the style that they wanted to design in, what do we want to know. Not only like about the type in use, but also, again, what I mentioned, like their own visual identity, which was a typeface that they think represented themselves the best. Here you can see an example from Van Louis Noury, which was actually competing with an advertisement from France, and I guess most of you will know the type foundry of Deberny and Deberny-Peignot. And you can see that what was happening in France, that Van Louis Noury wanted to react a little bit against it. They would use the same kind of floral ornaments, but they would use a completely different style of the typeface for their own identity. Also, they're beautiful logo types, and this indicates exactly what I was saying with the with the printers marks of the early printers. This is again like the logo advertisement of Carabin Schildknecht, and it's surrounded with all the metal swords. So, of course, nobody could ignore that they were a type foundry. And to make it even better, luckily at those days, and especially in those magazines, they would actually indicate in the journals that who was supplying the printing types. So it would also indicate, okay, this is a printing type which was used for setting the body text, for setting the titles and everything to the magazines. So that's also an important or valuable source to know which were the typefaces that are commonly used. The type foundries didn't last very long, unfortunately, because they didn't invest in what, oops, I have to go back in a moment again, because they didn't invest in new technologies. At the right here, you can see an advertisement of the Linotype company, Mergenthaler, and they were already promoting themselves to like the mechanical automatic typesetting, so to speak, and unfortunately, they got bankrupt. I'll tell you an extra story a little bit later. But remember this specific invoice, like with the letterhead, it actually shows how large the company was. And also in some of the type specimens themselves, they also have like beautiful prints, engravings, which indicates the size of the company. And also regarding branding, you could see that the signage outside and even inside the building was used to actually promote themselves. I looked up the different addresses, and luckily Van der Borg building still exists. It's my former Lucca School of Arts, where I studied graphic design when I was younger. And if you look closer, like because there's an engraving that I found in London, there's still some similarities from the older buildings. Also, Van Louis-Noury, like the facade still exists. The rest of the big factory, unfortunately, is gone. But if you look at this specific image from one of the type specimen books, and you see the facade on the right, you can tell, that this is now a library for Arabic literature. So it's still to do with some artistic works and still to do with type, with graphic design, and you name it. Another factor that caused the three foundries to cease is actually that in 1917, a very clever Dutch foundry, Lettergieterij Amsterdam, built a sister company in the heart of Brussels. Again, the building still exists. This is now a school of visual arts for videography, like video recording and television making. And again, to see how the building was still vast, and it actually comprised 2 different streets. But the cleverness of this Lettergieterij Amsterdam is that they invested also in casting type for the new mechanical typesetting, so not only letterpress. And you can see that they used their own style, so from that moment on it was only Dutch typefaces that were distributed all over Belgium. And this was one of their bestsellers, typeface, that you can see Amsterdam in, or LA, and that was used inside the building to expand also the branding to the elevator and to the engravings in the walls. These are all the names of the type founders over the years. And also they created, to celebrate centenary, like 100 years of the independence of Belgium, they created one unique Belgian typeface which was called the indépendant, the independent, and they started using it as well for their own branding. You can see that there's already a shift in style, and also in France and surrounding countries, you could see that a shift to modernism. And also Établissement Plantin started using sans serif typefaces to promote themselves. But what happens is that from that moment on, because of the not investing in new technology, and also the change of fashion and the style of typography, that the typefaces of Van der Borgt, of Van Louis-Noury, and from Carabin Schildknecht were all out of fashion. And nobody actually knew what happened to the material until we found those boxes in the basements of the Royal Library in Brussels. Now, part of the project is also that I'm doing some revival work. But, like Tim mentioned earlier, I also am not creating just a replica. We no longer live in the Art Nouveau period, and we have different technologies of reading. So the style of reading is different. So according to, in this way, like the way that you change the size of your screen, the responsive type makes it possible to change the typefaces according to the width of the columns, and you name it, as you all know. So what I'm doing is making some interpretations from these historical, typical Belgian typefaces, making new fonts. And this is just an example to show one of the typefaces that I made variable, also like creating different masters and using interpolation. So at the moment, the project has selected around 8 different typefaces, which I'm developing in new fonts. And these are the very first time that originally Belgian typefaces are being made as digital fonts. And it's quite unique because nobody knew this existed. And if you read the history of Western typography and Western evolution of type, you hear or read texts about France, Germany, England, the Netherlands, but almost nothing from Belgium. And it's just wonderful that finding these boxes opened up so much inspiration. It became a larger project. This is one of the Belgian sans serif typefaces that is now being made in a whole variable font family. This is a more funny display type. It's called Gust, and Gust is one of the comic book figures, like Gust Flater or Gaston in French. And of course, I also wanted to pay homage to Pennequin, and also like make the digital version. This is not a variable font, but just to have like this 3-dimensional type made available for as a digital font. So that for this moment, well, the typefaces are not yet available, but probably in December or the beginning of January, the new website we launch, where this collection of Belgian fonts will be offered to the public, not only for Belgian designers, but also worldwide. And I hope that some newspaper in Belgium will contact me, because I really would love to create a font for one of the Belgian typefaces, not a font, but the whole family, so that there's also kind of a unity there and something there. So I hope you can see that throughout the history of type founding and the way they were promoting themselves, because they had to compete with one another, they had to self-found, that you can see that type is important also for type founders themselves. So thank you very much for listening. Please feel free to follow the Instagram for any updates. And if you have any questions, come and catch me somewhere at the conference. And I'm happy to answer any questions or to collaborate if anything. So, kon kun kap, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.